Rain fell over the docking yard on Earth's orbital ring, and Rhea Callan watched it slide down the outer window in thin silver lines. She had just landed her cruiser, the Merit, after a 9-day patrol along the Varan trade corridor, and her hands still smelled like engine coolant. She was tired, but not too tired to notice the message blinking on her wrist screen. It was from Fleet Command, marked urgent, and it told her to report to a Dravith inspection point before she could even change her uniform. She sighed and turned back toward the shuttle bay. The Dravith Empire had ruled most of known space for 300 years. Nobody remembered a war they had lost. Earth had joined the wider galactic community 30 years ago, and from the very first meeting, the Empire made it clear that humans were guests, not equals. Every ship that carried Earth's flag was subject to search. Every trade route needed Dravith approval. Every year, tribute payments grew a little heavier, and every year, Earth paid without much complaint, because refusing meant war, and nobody believed Earth could win a war against the Empire. Rhea reached the inspection checkpoint an hour later. A Dravith patrol commander named Carroll stood waiting with 4 armed guards, his tall frame wrapped in silver armor, his eyes the pale yellow of his species. He did not greet her. He simply held up a hand and told her ship would be searched, its cargo held for review, and its crew questioned about recent movements near restricted space. "There is no restricted space on this route," Rhea said. "You gave us clearance for it yourself." Carroll smiled without warmth. "Clearance can change. You are still learning your place, Captain. It takes some species longer than others." She wanted to argue. She wanted to remind him that her ship carried medical supplies for a colony that needed them within the week. But arguing with a Dravith officer rarely ended well, and she had seen what happened to captains who tried. So she stood there, jaw tight, and watched as his soldiers tore through crates meant for sick children on a frozen moon, calling it a routine check, taking 3 containers for further study, which everyone knew meant they would never be returned. When it was over, Carroll told her she was free to go, as if he had done her a favor. She filed her report that night from her quarters, keeping her voice steady even though her hands were shaking with anger. She sent it to Fleet Command, expecting the usual reply, a note of sympathy and apology for the delay, nothing more. Earth never pushed back. It never could. But this time, the reply came from a name she did not recognize outside old classified files: Admiral Owen Blake. His message was short. He thanked her for her patience. He told her the incident had been logged and would be addressed soon, in a way she would understand later. Then he added a line that made her pause and read it 3 times. "Hold your position when the time comes. Trust the dark." She had no idea what it meant, and there was no explanation attached. She tried to reply, asking for clarification, but the channel was already closed. She sat there for a long while, staring at the words, wondering if it was some kind of coded comfort meant to make junior officers feel better about being humiliated. But something about the phrasing felt deliberate, almost rehearsed, like a promise someone had been carrying for a long time. Far from Earth's orbital ring, past the asteroid belt beyond Jupiter, Owen Blake stood in a control room built into the hollow shell of a dead moonlet. The room was quiet except for the low hum of machines and the occasional voice of an engineer confirming readings. On the wall in front of him, a wide screen displayed the outline of something enormous, still hidden under layers of camouflage netting and false hull plating, docked inside a chamber carved from solid rock. He had read Rhea Callan's report twice. He remembered his own early years serving under captains who had faced the same treatment, decades ago, back when Earth's fleet consisted of little more than patched-together freighters with weapons bolted on as an afterthought. He remembered the promises made in quiet rooms like this one, promises that Earth would never again beg for its dignity. An engineer approached him, a woman named Dana Osai, her uniform stained with grease, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She had spent 15 years designing the ship hidden behind them, and tonight she carried a data tablet with a single line of text on it, the final confirmation they had all been waiting for. "She's ready, sir," Dana said quietly. "Fully fueled, fully armed, and the cloaking field is holding steady across every test we've run, whenever you give the word." Blake looked at the tablet, then back at the hidden shape on the screen, its true form still a secret even to most of Earth's own government. "Not yet," he said, "but soon. Let the Empire tighten its grip a little more first. Let them believe nothing has changed." Dana nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she stepped back. 15 years of secrecy had cost people families, careers, even their names. She had told her own parents she died in a shipyard accident, just to keep this place hidden from coalition spies. She hoped more than anything that it would be worth it. Outside the control room, past reinforced doors and silent hallways, the hidden ship waited in the dark, patient as a held breath, while far above Earth's clouds, Rhea Callan stared out her window and wondered what kind of storm was coming, and whether she would be ready when it finally arrived. 15 years earlier, a small group of engineers gathered in an abandoned mining station near Jupiter, carrying blueprints that did not exist in any official Earth database. Among them was a young Dana Osai, fresh out of a propulsion program, chosen not because she had the most experience, but because she asked the right questions nobody else dared to ask. She wanted to know why humanity kept designing ships to survive Dravith weapons, instead of designing ships the Dravith could never catch, never scan, and never predict. That single question became the seed of a project that would consume the next decade and a half of her life. The idea was simple to describe and nearly impossible to build. A cloaking field strong enough to hide a ship the size of a small city from coalition sensors, paired with a drive system based on theories most physicists in the wider galaxy considered dead ends. Dravith scientists had dismissed similar concepts centuries ago, believing them inefficient and unstable. Earth's engineers, working in secret, without the Empire watching over their shoulders, decided to try anyway. They built the project inside a hollowed-out asteroid far from any regular trade route, using materials smuggled in through dozens of unrelated shipping companies, so no single supply chain would raise suspicion. Every engineer who joined signed away contact with their old lives. Families were told their loved ones had died in accidents, disappeared during dangerous research postings, or simply vanished without explanation. It was a brutal cost, and Blake, who had pushed for the project from its earliest days, carried the weight of every one of those lies personally. He remembered the day construction finally began, watching the first support beams lowered into the hollow asteroid under portable lighting rigs, wondering if he was building a miracle or a tomb. Over the years, small failures nearly ended the project more than once. An early prototype of the drive core overloaded during a test, killing 2 engineers and forcing a 6-month redesign. A cloaking field test once flickered just long enough for a passing coalition freighter to catch a strange sensor ghost, sending the entire team into a panic that lasted for weeks until the freighter's captain wrote it off as equipment malfunction and moved on. Every near miss taught them something. Every mistake made the final design stronger. Dana became the lead engineer by her 7th year on the project, promoted after the previous lead retired quietly, worn down by the secrecy and the guilt of the lives changed to build something that might never even be used. She threw herself into the work completely, sometimes sleeping only a few hours a night, driven by a stubborn belief that Earth deserved better than being pushed around by an empire that saw humans as nothing more than a convenient source of tribute. While the ship grew inside its hidden chamber, the galaxy outside kept moving. The Dravith Empire expanded its reach further every year, absorbing smaller species into forced alliances, raising tribute demands across dozens of systems, and crushing any resistance quickly and without mercy. Species that once had their own fleets now served as little more than labor colonies for Dravith industry. Word spread of entire star systems annexed overnight after their governments failed to meet impossible demands. Fleet Marshal Soren Val became known across the coalition as one of the Empire's most aggressive commanders, a man who believed conquest was simply the natural order of things, and who viewed Earth's continued independence as an embarrassing oversight that should have been corrected decades earlier. He had been pushing the Dravith ruling council for years to authorize a full military action against Earth, arguing that humans were growing too comfortable, too slow to comply, too willing to file complaints instead of accepting their place. The council resisted for a long time, mostly because Earth's tribute payments were reliable and conquest was expensive. But patience among the Hodliners was running out, and reports of small acts of defiance, like captains filing complaints after routine inspections, only added fuel to Val's argument. Back in the hidden chamber near Jupiter, Blake received a private briefing about growing tensions from Earth's intelligence network, warning that the Empire was preparing something larger than another round of tribute negotiations. He read the briefing twice, then walked the long corridor toward the control room where the ship, still unnamed by anyone outside the project, sat wrapped in false plating. He called the project team together that night. Dana stood at the front of the room, tired but steady, and told them the final systems checks were complete. The cloaking field held under every stress test they could throw at it. The weapons arrays, powerful enough to make Dravith commanders reconsider everything they believed about human technology, were fully operational. The only thing left was a name, and after years of calling it nothing but the Project, Blake finally gave it one, borrowed from an old weapon carried by soldiers who once stood their ground against overwhelming odds and refused to fall back. He called it Halberd. Word of the ship's completion reached Earth's highest levels of government within days, kept strictly among a handful of officials who understood exactly how dangerous it would be if the secret leaked even slightly before the right moment. Blake requested patience. He wanted to wait for a moment when the Empire's own arrogance would make the reveal impossible to ignore, a moment when doubt would be erased instantly and completely. He did not have to wait long. Reports soon arrived that Fleet Marshal Val had finally convinced the ruling council to authorize a full blockade of Earth's home system, framed publicly as a routine compliance inspection, but understood privately as exactly what it was: an ultimatum meant to remind humanity, once and for all, who truly held power in the galaxy. A siren cut through the corridors of Earth's orbital defense station, sharp and steady, the kind of alarm nobody had heard sound for real in over a decade. Rhea Callan dropped the tool she had been using to repair a damaged panel on the Merit and ran toward the command deck, her heart already pounding before she even reached the doorway. On the main display, 40 Dravith warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's home system, arranged in a formation built for intimidation as much as combat. At the center of the formation sat a massive flagship, larger than anything Earth had ever fielded, broadcasting a single message on every open channel across the system. Fleet Marshal Soren Val's voice filled the command deck, calm and mocking, announcing that the Empire had arrived to conduct a full compliance review of Earth's tribute obligations, and that any resistance would be treated as an act of rebellion against lawful authority. He gave humanity 72 hours to agree to tripled tribute payments and full military inspection rights across every human colony, or face what he called necessary correction. Rhea felt the blood drain from her face as she watched the fleet spread out to surround key orbital points around Earth. Her own cruiser was one of only 12 ships Earth could scramble on short notice, most of them decades old, none of them a match for even a single Dravith capital ship, let alone 40. Command ordered every available ship into defensive formation anyway, not because anyone believed they could win, but because standing down without resistance would be its own kind of surrender. Rhea took her position near the outer defense line, watching the massive Dravith fleet through her viewport, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Down on Earth, the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session that stretched through the night. Diplomats scrambled to open communication with the Empire, hoping to negotiate the terms down to something survivable. Val allowed the conversation, mostly because it amused him, and spent much of it reminding Earth's representatives exactly how outmatched they were, comparing the negotiation to a child asking an adult for mercy. One representative dared to ask what would happen if Earth simply refused the new terms entirely. Val laughed, an unpleasant sound over the comm channel, and told them refusal would be answered with a demonstration strike on one of Earth's orbital stations, enough destruction to make the lesson permanent, followed by full annexation if further resistance continued. The Council ended the session without an answer, unable to agree on surrender or defiance, and word spread quickly through Earth's fleet that no help was coming from diplomacy. Rhea expected new orders any hour, either a retreat to save what ships they could, or a suicidal stand meant only to slow the inevitable. Instead, a single encrypted message arrived on her private channel, sent directly from Owen Blake, the same name attached to the strange message she had received days earlier after her encounter with Carol. The message was short: "Hold your position. Do not fire first no matter what happens. Trust the dark, Captain, it will not be long now." She read it 3 times, frustration boiling under her calm exterior. She had no idea who Blake truly was beyond a name on old classified files, no idea what he expected her to trust, and no way to ask for clarification before the deadline arrived. But something about the tone, steady and certain in a way nothing else had been during this entire crisis, made her choose to obey rather than question it openly. She relayed a quiet order to her own crew, telling them to hold formation and hold fire regardless of provocation, trusting instincts she could not fully explain even to herself. The 72-hour deadline ticked down across every screen on Earth's fleet, each hour dragging longer than the last. Diplomats tried one final round of negotiation, offering partial tribute increases as compromise, but Val rejected the offer outright, growing visibly impatient with what he considered pointless stalling from an inferior species. As the final hour approached, Val ordered his flagship to power its main weapon array, aiming it toward one of Earth's largest orbital stations, intending to make good on his promise of a demonstration strike meant to break Earth's will before any invasion even began. Sensors across the Dravith fleet lit up with weapon charge readings, and panic spread through Earth's defense network as officers realized the threat was no longer theoretical. Rhea gripped the edge of her command console, watching the charge indicator climb toward full power on her tactical display, every instinct screaming at her to do something, anything, even though she knew her small cruiser could do nothing to stop a weapon of that size. Then, with less than a minute remaining before the strike, every sensor console across the entire Dravith fleet erupted into chaos at once. Alarms blared through 40 separate bridges simultaneously as impossible readings flooded their instruments, readings that made no sense according to any known law of physics the Empire understood. Officers accustomed to absolute confidence in their technology suddenly found themselves staring at numbers that suggested something enormous had appeared directly behind their formation, close enough to touch, without a single warning beforehand. Space itself seemed to tear open behind the Dravith fleet, a shimmering distortion spreading wider by the second, and for the first time in 300 years, the confident hum of Dravith command channels fell completely, utterly silent. The distortion behind the Dravith fleet stretched wider and wider, folding light around its edges like water swallowing a stone, until it finally split open and revealed something no sensor operator in the formation had a name for. A ship 3 kilometers long emerged from the tier in space, its hull dark and angular, covered in weapon arrays that did not match any known coalition classification, radiating power readings so far beyond normal scale that half the Dravith science officers assumed their instruments had simply broken. They had not broken. Halberd had arrived. On its bridge, Owen Blake stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the Draveth formation scramble on the tactical display in front of him. Beside him, Dana Osei monitored the ship systems with quiet intensity, her years of sleepless work finally reaching this single moment. The cloaking field had held perfectly until the exact second Blake gave the order to drop it, and now there was no hiding what Earth had built. Fleet Marshal Val's voice crackled across the open channel, no longer calm, no longer mocking, demanding to know what had just appeared behind his fleet and ordering immediate identification. Blake did not answer right away. He let the silence stretch, let every Draveth officer stare at their screens a little longer, let the fear build on its own before he ever said a word. Val, unwilling to appear shaken in front of his own command staff, made the decision that would define the rest of the encounter. He ordered his entire fleet to open fire on what he called the human anomaly, refusing to believe a single ship, however strange it looked, could withstand a coordinated strike from 40 warships at once. 40 ships fired everything they had. Beams of energy and streams of projectile fire lit up the space around Halberd in a storm bright enough to be seen from Earth's surface without a telescope. For a moment, even Dana held her breath, watching the shield readings on her console despite knowing every test result by heart. The storm passed. Halberd's shields had not dropped below 98% capacity. Silence returned to the Draveth channels, heavier this time, filled with a kind of disbelief that bordered on panic. Officers who had spent their entire careers believing in Draveth superiority now stared at a ship that had shrugged off their full combined arsenal without so much as a flicker of visible damage. Blake finally spoke, his voice calm and measured, carrying clearly across every open channel in the fleet. He introduced himself simply as a representative of Earth and stated that Halberd had not come to destroy anyone, only to demonstrate exactly how outdated the Empire's assumptions about humanity truly were. He gave Val one chance to stand down his fleet before any further action was taken. Val, humiliated in front of his own officers and unwilling to back down publicly, ordered a second strike, this time focused entirely on Halberd's weapon systems in a desperate attempt to disable rather than destroy. Hopping a targeted approach might succeed where brute force had failed. It did not succeed either, but it gave Blake the justification he needed. He gave the order for a single, precise response. Halberd's weapon arrays, capable of far more devastating action, instead fired a coordinated volley aimed exclusively at the weapon systems of Val's flagship, disabling every offensive system on the vessel within seconds without harming a single member of its crew. The strike was surgical, deliberate, and unmistakably a message rather than an act of war. Across the rest of the Draveth formation, tactical officers watched their own weapon readiness indicators and understood immediately what had just happened. If Halberd could disable an entire flagship's arsenal with pinpoint accuracy in seconds, it could just as easily have destroyed the entire fleet outright, and had chosen not to. Val's voice returned to the channel moments later, and for the first time in the entire encounter, it carried something other than arrogance. His question came out clipped, almost unwilling, demanding to know exactly what Earth had built and how long it had been hidden from Coalition detection. Blake answered honestly, telling him 15 years, built entirely within human space, using no stolen or borrowed Coalition technology. He explained that Earth had grown tired of being treated as a lesser species, tired of inspections that stole medical supplies, tired of tribute payments that grew heavier every year with no end in sight, and had decided, quietly and patiently, to build something that would finally force the Empire to negotiate as equals rather than dictate as rulers. Recordings of the entire confrontation, captured automatically by dozens of independent sensor arrays across the Draveth fleet and nearby Coalition trade vessels, began spreading through communication networks within minutes. far faster than anyone could contain. Species across the galaxy who had never dared question Dravith dominance watched footage of a single Earth vessel absorb a full fleet's firepower without damage, then dismantle a flagship's weapons with surgical precision in under 10 seconds. On the outer defense line, Rhea Callan watched the entire exchange from her cruiser's viewport, her earlier fear slowly giving way to something she had not expected to feel that day. Pride, mixed with a strange, disorienting sense of finally understanding every cryptic message Blake had sent her over the past several days. "Trust the dark," he had said. Now she understood exactly what had been waiting in it all along. Within a single day, footage of Halberd's Decloaked spread to every corner of the coalition, passed from trade ship to trade ship, replayed on news channels across dozens of species who had spent generations believing the Dravith Empire could never be challenged. Governments that once dismissed Earth as an irrelevant, backward colony now scrambled to reassess everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the galaxy. Blake opened a formal channel to the Dravith ruling council less than 6 hours after the confrontation ended, requesting a direct conversation rather than routing through diplomats or intermediaries. The council, still reeling from reports of their flagship's humiliating defeat, agreed to speak with him almost immediately, eager to understand exactly what they were dealing with before deciding how to respond. He kept his tone calm throughout the entire conversation, never raising his voice, never gloating over what had happened. He explained plainly that Earth had no interest in conquest, no desire to expand beyond its own systems, and no intention of using Halberd or the additional ships already under construction behind it as tools of aggression. What Earth wanted was simple: an end to forced tribute, an end to unannounced inspections that stripped cargo without consequence. Full recognition as a sovereign member of the coalition, with a permanent seat on the ruling council, rather than the observer status it had been given for 30 years. He made clear these were not requests open to negotiation the way previous discussions had been. Earth had spent 15 years preparing quietly, patiently, specifically so this moment would never turn into a negotiation Earth could lose. Several members of the ruling council pushed back immediately, led by voices sympathetic to Fleet Marshal Vall, who argued that giving in to demands backed by a single unknown vessel would set a dangerous precedent, inviting other species across the coalition to challenge Dravith authority the same way. They proposed a full military response, gathering every available fleet to overwhelm Earth through sheer numbers regardless of what Halberd had proven capable of. Cooler voices on the council disagreed strongly. One senior counselor, older and more cautious than most of her colleagues, pointed out that a single Earth vessel had absorbed the combined firepower of 40 warships without measurable damage, then disabled a flagship's entire weapon system with precision that suggested restraint rather than the limits of its capability. If that was true, she argued, then no one could say with any confidence how many more ships like it existed, or what they were truly capable of if pushed into an actual war rather than a demonstration. The council debated for hours, torn between wounded pride and practical fear. In the end, practicality won, though barely. They voted to open formal negotiations with Earth rather than escalate toward open conflict, a decision that infuriated hardliners like Vall but left him with no political support strong enough to override it. Word of the Council's decision reached Earth within a day, delivered through official diplomatic channels for the first time in 30 years without a single condescending remark attached. The terms Blake had outlined were accepted almost entirely, with only minor adjustments to timelines for implementation. Tribute payments would end within the year. Inspection rights would be revoked immediately. Earth's seat on the ruling council would be formalized at the next full coalition assembly. As part of the agreement, the Dravith Empire was required to issue a formal, public apology for decades of coercive treatment toward Earth and its citizens, delivered directly by a representative of their choosing. To the quiet satisfaction of several officers watching from Earth's fleet, the Council chose Carol, the same patrol commander who had humiliated Rhea Callan during a routine inspection just days before the crisis began, to deliver the apology in person aboard Earth's orbital station. Rhea made absolutely certain she was standing at the front of the receiving line when he arrived. Carol stepped off his shuttle looking noticeably smaller than he had during their last encounter, his usual confidence replaced by careful, measured formality. He read his prepared statement stiffly, acknowledging decades of unfair treatment and confirming the Empire's new commitment to treating Earth as a sovereign equal going forward. When he finished, he looked directly at Rhea, seeming to recognize her, and offered a short, private nod that carried far more meaning than his official statement had. She did not smile, but she did not look away either. After years of swallowing every insult in silence, she let herself simply stand there and be seen, representing a species that had finally stopped asking for permission to exist as equals among the stars. Behind her, Earth's fleet held formation near the station, small and outdated compared to the Dravith war machines that had surrounded them just days earlier, but no longer alone in the way they had always been. Somewhere beyond the orbital ring, Halberd continued its slow, silent patrol, no longer hidden, no longer a secret, simply present, exactly as Blake had always intended it to be. 6 months after the confrontation above Earth, the assembly hall of the Coalition's ruling council looked different than it had for the last 30 years. A new seat had been added to the circular chamber, positioned equally among the others rather than pushed to the outer ring where observer species traditionally sat. A small plaque beside it read simply, Earth, in the shared trade language used across the galaxy. Owen Blake stood before the full council for the first time as Earth's official representative, no longer a name hidden in classified files, but a recognized voice among equals. He spoke plainly, as he always had, telling the assembled species that Halberd had never been built as a weapon of conquest. It existed to guarantee that Earth would never again be forced to bow simply, because it lacked the strength to refuse. He confirmed openly, for the first time, that additional ships of similar design were already under construction, though he made clear their purpose remained defense rather than expansion. Several council members, representing species who had quietly suffered under Dravith dominance for generations, approached Earth's delegation in the days that followed, asking careful questions about how such a project had been kept secret for so long, and whether similar efforts might be possible for their own systems. Word spread that other, smaller powers within the Coalition had begun reconsidering old grievances against the Empire, emboldened simply by watching Earth refuse to be pushed any further. Back on Earth, the human cost of the project was finally allowed into the light. Dana Ose stood outside a modest house on the outskirts of a coastal city, hands trembling slightly as she waited for a door to open. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say 100 times during the flight down from orbit, and none of it felt adequate now that the moment had actually arrived. Her mother answered the door and stood frozen for a long moment, staring at a daughter she had buried, in every meaningful sense, 15 years earlier. Neither of them said anything for a while. Dana simply stepped forward and let herself be pulled into an embrace that carried both relief and a grief that would take a long time to fully heal. Across the country and beyond it, similar reunions played out quietly among dozens of engineers who had sacrificed their old lives to build something they were never certain would even be used, let alone succeed. Earth's government held a public ceremony honoring the project's engineers, releasing their true identities for the first time, and acknowledging the sacrifices made in secret to protect the planet's future. It was a small gesture compared to 15 years of hidden lives, but it mattered, especially to those who had spent so long believing their work would never be recognized at all. Rhea Callan received new orders shortly after the ceremony, promoted to command one of Earth's first openly built warships, constructed using lessons learned from Halberd's design, but intended from the start to be seen rather than hidden. She stood on its bridge during its maiden patrol, running her hand along a console that still smelled faintly of fresh metal. Thinking back to the day, a Dravith patrol commander confiscated medical supplies meant for children on a frozen moon, treating her and everyone under her command as less than equal. That world no longer existed, not entirely, not everywhere, but enough had changed that she allowed herself a small, private sense of satisfaction as her new ship moved into formation, alongside two others identical to it, part of a growing fleet built without secrecy for the first time in Earth's history among the stars. In the distance, moving along its usual slow patrol route near the edge of the system, Halberd passed silently overhead, its dark hull catching faint sunlight as it turned. It no longer needed to hide. Every ship in the coalition knew exactly what it was capable of, and that knowledge alone had done more to protect Earth than any negotiation ever could. Rhea watched it go, remembering the years spent absorbing insults in silence, remembering every small humiliation she had once believed was simply the price of being human among older, stronger species. Earth had spent 30 years being underestimated, treated as an afterthought by an empire that assumed strength was the only thing worth respecting. It had taken exposing its hand only once to change that permanently, and as her new ship settled into its patrol course beside two others built in the open, she found herself thinking that patience, in the end, had been the sharpest weapon Earth ever built.